Recording Academy, Reverb and Delay Fundamentals.
Hey everyone, welcome back. In this module, we'll be talking about reverb and delay fundamentals. Now, there's gonna be a lot of things I'm gonna add in this lesson as well. I'll talk a little bit briefly about auto-tune. There's a few other plugins as well that don't fit necessarily into reverb and delay, but I wanna make sure I give a shout out to some of the creative plugins out there that are gonna really give you that modern sound and kind of open up some of the imagination and creativity that you can have when it comes to mixing. But first and foremost, we need to start with reverb and delay. So make sure you have a good pair of headphones on and we'll get started. Okay, so where we left off in this mix, we basically have a good amount of EQ and compression going on multiple tracks and also buses as well. Now, when we were setting up our track layout, I made mention of these sends, okay? So if you can't see the sends, make sure you have your mix tab open, and then make sure you're making use of this vertical adjustment going up and down with your cursor. You should be able to see what are called sends. So we have our inserts. Inserts are where we put our plugins. We have EQ, compression, as you can see on this lead vocal right here. But what about this sends section? Well, the purpose of a send is so that we can put one plugin in place, like a delay effect or a reverb. And instead of having to put a reverb on every single track, we have 20 tracks in this session. Instead of me adding a reverb to my lead vocal, instead of adding a reverb to my kick drum and my overhead, instead of having all these instances of reverb, I can set up one reverb channel, which is going to be on an effects channel, and I can send a certain amount of information from each of my tracks. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in context. So if I have my lead vocal selected, I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to where it says Add Effects Channel. Add FX channel. As soon as you do, on the far right, you're gonna see this grayed out channel called Effects 1, and I'm gonna have this one routed to my mix bus. So on this effects channel, right now there is no information, but if I scroll back over to my lead vocal, we should have, where I have sends, I can go to Send, Audio Destination, and then Effects 1. In fact, I'm gonna go through and select all of these channels here. I'm gonna hold this shift key, go all the way to acoustic 2, make sure they're all highlighted. Then I'm gonna go up here to sends, audio destination, and effects 1. So now you can see under our sends tab, we have the effects 1 selected. Now each of these effects 1s has a blue fader, and this fader kind of moves left and right. If you move this send level to the left, it's gonna decrease the amount that that track is going to that effects channel. If I move it to the right or I increase it, I'm going to send more of that track into the effects channel. So here with the sends, we need to be able to blend how much are we sending to that reverb. If I'm setting up a reverb, I don't want my kick drum to have just as much reverb as my lead vocal. I don't want my lead vocal to have just as much reverb as a shaker, for instance. So we'll be able to blend that as we're going. But for now, we'll just leave the sends where they're at. Let's go back to this effects 1 channel. So the effects 1 is being output to my mix bus. Anytime you need to change the output, just simply click where it has this mix bus or any sort of name. This is your output setting, okay? Now the input for this send are the sources, which are coming from those 20 tracks earlier. But right now we don't have any effects loaded on our effects 1 channel. So I'm gonna go up to inserts, I'm gonna go to PreSonus, and we're going to use some of their built-in effects. The first one I'll talk about is room reverb. This is very much what it sounds like it's supposed to be doing. This is going to be emulating the sound of a space. So what's the point in recording a bunch of dry vocals with a bunch of acoustic treatment all around if you're just going to end up making it sound like a space anyway? Well, we want to have as much control as possible. So if you have something that's very dry and very direct, you can obviously add more reverb to it. But if you record something that's very echoey and ambient, it's very hard to take away ambience. So we have a bunch of dry recorded stuff, and then we have this room reverb set up. Now, each of these settings, there's a few main ones I wanted to point out to you, and of course this is going to change depending on what preset you might be using. I highly encourage you to use a preset. First of all, we have this tail pre-delay offset. So a pre-delay is going to be a delay in the signal before the reverb happens. So if you think about a snare drum having a very exact moment where the snare drum hits, how soon does that reverb start to happen? If you have a 0 millisecond pre-delay, meaning you have no pre-delay whatsoever, the reverb will start as soon as that snare drum hits. So your snare drum hits and you have reverb. If you delay that reverb signal, you'll hear more of that initial hit. You'll hear the hit of the snare drum, and then however many milliseconds after is when the reverb will start. So you'll have more of a hit reverb instead of it being hit reverb, if that makes sense. So pre-delay comes in handy when you want to get more of the nuances. You want to hear more of that dry, unaffected signal. For now, it's just set to 0. The length of the reverb is very important. Most of the time we're talking about in seconds. A good natural space to be in is anywhere from 1 to 2.4 seconds. 2.4 seconds certainly is going to be something that you're going to be hearing, but if you have it set to 3 seconds, which is the default on this Reverb plugin, 3 seconds is a long time in the world of music. So you're definitely going to hear this as an overly affected signal. You're just adding more length to the reverb. How long is the decay happening? And then we have the mix knob. Okay, so this is a mix knob for early reflections and then late reverb balance. So this mix, early reflections basically sound more like an echo or a flutter. So how much of that fluttering, the bouncing of the walls, do you want to hear? If you don't want to hear any early reflections, you can simply turn this mix knob all the way to the right. Visually, you can see this happening on the screen. You can see we don't have any of those transients. If I move this all the way to early reflections, these vertical bars, those are the slapping against the wall, so to speak. We can move this up if you want to have less of that early reflections. You want to hear more of just the reverb tail. As you can see, you can mess with the mix knob as well. Now, size is going to have to do just with the color of the reverb. Like you want something to sound really tinny and small to be more like a bathroom. That's going to be a smaller space. You can mess with the geometry as well. They have a medium hall, a large hall. A room reverb is not necessarily going to be like a studio room. It's more going to sound like a bedroom from my experience. In a small room is going to be like a closet or something that's very unnatural and not as musical. Most of the time I'm sticking with a medium hall or a large hall, and as we'll get to some presets in the future. Now, character is simply going to be kind of like an EQ for your reverb. How much dampness do you want to have? How populated do you want the reverb to be? This will kind of tame some of the harshness you might hear with some of the reflections in reverbs. Then you have some geometry changes as well. Stuff at the bottom, I'm not changing very much at all. I'm going to pick a preset that I like, and then I'm going to tune that preset, as we'll see in just a second. So if I'm having every track go to a reverb, I don't want this reverb to be overly musical. I don't want it to be something that's in your face reverb. I want it to be very subtle. So I'm going to click this button for the presets here. Let's get to where you can see it. All right, on the presets, we have different things. An arena is obviously going to be huge. We can go through a few of these just so you can get a taste for what the reverbs are doing. So if I load the arena preset, you can see it's very large. We've got a large hall loaded. Now on the effects channel, you have a solo button, so we can actually solo what we're hearing in the reverb. If I go to verse 1, I was wondering if this is gonna blow my eardrums out. Let's just go to, we'll go to chorus 1. Let's set up kind of a loop region. How can I as rich as I ever want? Where I come from. And you hear with that arena, it's got an extremely long reverb to it. Okay, we're getting a lot of reflections going on there. All right. And there's just also a lot of information because we're having every track go to it. It sounds like you're in an arena. If I unsolo it and we're listening to it in context of the mix, the great thing about having an effects set up, I can rename this to say reverb main. This is my main reverb. I can take this fader and I control how much of the reverb we're hearing overall. So I'm gonna go ahead and play the chorus 1. You'll see me switch through different presets and we'll kind of find something that sounds pretty good. Here's it in context with the rest of the music. Everyone, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods when the deer stand at a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look.
I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from. Just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from. Just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from.
Okay, I've got this medium studio reverb set up. Quite like the sound of it, but I'm gonna show you a little bit of tweaking I'm gonna do just to tame some of the, there's a clicking sound that I can hear. I don't know if it's coming necessarily from the claps or the snare drum, but what we can do on any effects channel, we can add more effects. So we have an inserts button, just like we have on normal tracks. And I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna add a EQ, and I'm gonna click and drag this EQ so that it comes right before the room reverb. So if I hit play, what I want you to notice is what we're doing with this EQ is we are EQing the signals going into the reverb. So I don't want to hear very much high end on the reverb. I want this to be kind of more subtle, something that you feel more than something that you're hearing all the time. And like I said before, we're hearing a lot of that snare drum and claps. Well, a simple thing we can do is just add a high cut filter. I'm just gonna click and drag this down as far as maybe 1K. So now we have an affected signal going to our reverb. So if I hit play.
Ever want more? Where I come from.
So that's the sound of the reverb with this EQ in place. If I bypass the EQ, here's what the reverb sounds like before, and then I'll turn on the EQ for the reverb. And here it is in context with the rest of the mix if I unsolo the reverb.
Where I come from, where I come from.
Now another thing you can do when it comes to mixing in your reverb, we need to talk about this with the sends. We want to be able to tell it how much are we sending to the reverb. So one of the things for sure, I don't think I necessarily need a lot of kick drum going to the reverb. So I'm going to drag this down to about -11 or so. I can maybe turn it up a little bit with some of the drum overheads. The claps are fine, the shaker is fine. I don't need a lot of bass guitar going to the reverb, so I'm going to turn down the bass guitar to like -20, just make it obsolete. If you want to bypass this completely, you can just hit the little power icon next to any of your sends to make sure that they're not going at all. The piano and the synthesizer seem to be okay. Let's listen to some of the guitars. If I solo the guitars bus, notice you also have got a solo for the reverb. So let's hear what the reverb is doing for the guitars. Obviously the ambience and the reverb, something that I personally really wanted to hear with the guitars. I'm not using any sort of reverb pedal, except earlier when we had the Universal Audio, the Dream Effects pedal, it has got a reverb knob on it as well. Had a lot of spring on the DI signal. But as soon as you add some reverb, it's really helping to glue your tracks together. Another effect we want to talk about is also the delay function. So I'm going to do the same thing pretty much that I did with the reverb, but I want to be a little bit more specific with what sorts of delays I'm adding. So let's add a delay to our electric guitars. I'm going to highlight each of these. I'm all selected. let's go ahead and add an effects channel. We'll call this one delay. And then I want to highlight these as well. Go to sends, audio destination, and then I want to send these to the delay. And again, I can increase the visible space I'm seeing vertically. Notice our mix window is getting a lot more crowded than it used to be. But now we've got these signals going to this delay effects. But of course, we need to add a delay. PreSonus has got a pretty fun one called analog delay, which looks very much like a guitar pedal. This one's got a whole lot of swirling information, things that sound pretty crazy. One important thing to note, whenever you're using an effects that is on any sort of plugin that you're using on an effects track, you will see this 100% locked wet signal. Generally speaking, when you have an effects channel set up, you're wanting that effects channel to be 100%. So you're not hearing any of the dry signal whatsoever. Now, you don't have to be locked into this. You can always uncheck this box and you can dial this back so you're hearing more of the dry signal come through. But this would be more kind of like a parallel processing effect than it would be a natural effects channel. Most of the time we just keep this locked, and that way you can change how much delay you're hearing. So with this delay, I'm very interested in doing a lot of width. So I'm going to increase this width knob. And the main things you want to be concerned with are the time factor and the feedback. So this button for sync, it will actually recognize whatever tempo you have your song set to, and it can sync the time factor so you don't have to worry about how many milliseconds it is. This song, again, was at 108 beats per minute. So right now it is set to a dotted eighth note delay. If I take this knob here, I can change it to an eighth note. I probably want to go with something more like, let's see, just a regular 16th note. And if I uncheck the sync button, you can see that that happens to be 138.9 milliseconds exactly, okay? So you can set that to whatever you need it to be. All right, feedback. Now your feedback is going to be how often are you hearing the delays? How many delays are happening on the signal? So if you increase feedback, you will hear more repetitions of delay as it's going. Let's just take a listen. It'd be better to hear this stuff in context. So I'm going to solo our delay channel. Let's take a listen to what it's doing, and I'll kind of mess around with the feedback knobs and a few things on screen. I like that setting because especially when I'm kind of chugging on the low notes with the guitar, you can hear it very much in time with the music. So I ended up with a 16th note delay, feedback about 37%. And then of course I'm taking that fader for the delay. I'm turning it down about minus 4.5. Now a cool thing you can do as well, you can send your delay into your reverb track. That'll of course hide the sound of the delay a little bit more, but it might help it to sit in the mix a little bit better. Again, instead of sending it to the mix bus, you can simply just select the reverb main. We'll take a listen to that. Now, a few other things you can do with delay. Of course, you can put a delay directly on a channel. If I go to the lead vocal, let's just unmute some of these solos here. We'll clear our solos. I wouldn't do this personally, but just to show you, we'll go into the inserts page and I'll add an analog delay directly to my lead vocal. And here you can notice we have this dry wet knob. So I want to show you this in practice. So if I happen to set up something like, let's go back to a 16th note delay with this much feedback. I'm going to start with the dry knob all the way to the left, meaning you should just be hearing the lead vocal completely dry. Here he goes.
On my hook, that sunrise when it hits her eyes, and she gives me that old look.
Now I'm going to increase the delay's dry wet knob, so you're hearing more of the delay and less of the dry signal.
I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from. Just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and
You can hear it's a lot more it's like a slap back delay. On the colored section, we see some familiar terms that we get from an EQ. This is a high cut filter. So I've rolled this back to 2.67. All that sibilance, the harshness that we normally hear at 5K, I'm just rolling that off because the more sibilance, the more S's and T's that you hear on a delay, the more prominent it's gonna be. And again, if you do this approach, if you put your delays and reverbs directly on your tracks, you're gonna find yourself putting it probably around 7%, maybe as high as 10% when it comes to the dry wet knob, because we really don't want that much to be coming through unless you're going for that sort of effect. I'm thinking about this with the song or the artist, The Weeknd. A lot of times in pop music recently, they almost have this like bathroom quality of reverb and ambience. If you're going for something like that, you want that very like overproduced, this sounds like it's coming from a bathroom, you simply need to increase the dry wet knob. You want to hear more of the wet signal, and you want to decrease the feedback. So we can achieve this if I want to have a more affected lead vocal. I'm going to put it in context of the entire mix. So I'm going to hit play on this. I'm going to decrease the feedback on the delay, but I'm going to increase the wet knob so we're getting more of an affected lead vocal. This kind of sound, to me, it kind of sounds more like kind of sounds more old school or something you'd hear from The Weeknd. Here we go.
Ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from. Just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from.
Okay, so obviously that's more affected. I'm just gonna remove this effect. If you want to, just click any of these triangles right here and go to remove, and that is gone. All intents and purposes, that's it for reverb and delay. Now I'd like to take just a few minutes to shout out a few plugins and things that might be a little bit paid for in the future for you. Shout out some different companies and things that you may want to consider if you're looking at going down some of these rabbit holes. The first glaring thing I want to talk about is auto-tune, because when you get PreSonus Studio One, back in the day when we had PreSonus version 3, we came with an introductory version of Melodyne. PreSonus Studio One has a lot of built-in compatibility with Melodyne, so I encourage you to check that out. But I will say that Melodyne is a lot more expensive than some of the alternatives you have available today. That'll have to be its own dedicated video with getting into Melodyne, because it's a little bit more scientific than some of these other plugins. The one I wanted to give a shout out to today is one that I tried out just a few years ago, and it's called Waves Tune. Waves Tune Real Time. I'm gonna load up a mono version of this. This one is relatively affordable. I believe you can get this when they're on sale. Sometimes they've been as low as $20, $30. The thing about Waves you need to understand though is that Waves often makes use of their license updates. So if you're somebody that updates your computer a lot, you may find yourself having to pay for this thing like every 12 months or every 24 months, just so it's compatible with your software. But most auto-tune plugins are gonna have these similar features. So I'm gonna load auto-tune. I want it to come as early as possible on my lead vocal. Now speed is gonna be how quickly do you want the auto-tune function to latch on to your audio. It defaults to 15 milliseconds. That might be pretty quick. The quicker some of these things are, like the note transition, the quicker you go with the speed, the more it's going to sound like T-Pain, the more you're going to get that overly auto-tune effect. But I do want to select a key. So I've got this right now set to chromatic, meaning it's just going to tune to whatever note you happen to be singing. If I'm in the key of D, for this song, I should not be singing the note C pretty much at all. I don't believe at any point in the song I should be singing C. It would be more fitting in the key of D that I would sing a C sharp or a B. So I'm going to change this from chromatic, and I'm going to use the major scale. I'm going to select D major. So what it's doing now is it's negating any of the keys that wouldn't be present in D major. Also, I want to tell it that I am pretty much a baritone. This is going to be my range for this song. As you can see, if you select a different range, if you go up to alto, that's going to be like a lower voiced female. Soprano is going to be a much higher voiced female. And then you have as low as bass. So a bass singer can go very low. Baritone is usually in between bass and tenor would be like, for most pop music, it's going to be like a male singing very high notes. I'm going to go with baritone. And we'll just take a little listen to this effect, and you'll see me kind of dial in the speed and the note transition. I will be able to hear auto-tune as an effect. It's something that you'll hear over time, but I don't want it to be egregious like a T-Pain effect. I'm not going for a T-Pain effect. I just want it to cinch up some of the tuning on the vocal. Here we go.
How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the back.
So you can see this is definitely with the note transition at 16 milliseconds. It's definitely in the T-Pain category. I'm just going to type in, let's go with 50 milliseconds here. And speed, we'll go with 10 milliseconds. Let's take a listen to that.
Ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand.
I think it's very subtle. So if you hear it in context of the mix, fortunately, I mean, I'm not a great singer at all, but when you're using tuning apps like this, it's nice to see it's not doing too much work. If I was just singing a completely wrong note, it would be better for me just to go and re-record. But most of the time, it's just I'm a little bit too flat or I'm a little bit too sharp. Here it is in context with the rest of the mix. We'll unsolo the lead vocal. Here it is with no tuning, and then we're going to turn the tuning on. So it's off.
How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, how could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I?
Okay, I like that effect. That's auto-tune for you. Now, Universal Audio also makes an auto-tune advanced, so you can check out. I had this one as well, but with auto-tune advanced from Universal Audio, you do need to have a Universal Audio interface plugged in. So make sure before you go down any of these routes, make sure your system is compatible with whatever you choose to use. Now I'm going to stay on the lead vocal for a little bit. There's a few other plugins I want to give a shout out to. One of these is called Red Light Dist, which I imagine stands for Red Light Distortion. You're going to hear a lot of distortion with this one. Now, why would you put distortion on a vocal? I think it's a pretty cool effect. It's going to add a little bit of aggressiveness to the vocal. You can also use this on different instruments. We may put this on the drums in just a little bit. The first thing you need to do is dial back the mix knob. I don't want this to be at 100%. Again, I'm going for more of an effect of distortion. So I'm going to put it around 9.5%. I'm going to solo my lead vocal. I'm going to tune in some of these settings This is like a distortion pedal. So you have a drive knob. The more you turn up the drive, the more drive you're going to hear. It's going to overdrive the sound. You can change what type of tube it's using. So this is like emulating a tube amp. You can have a soft tube, hard tube, bad tube. And as you can tell, it goes up to fuzz, and it's just more broken and gnarly there. If you set to soft tube, it's pretty subtle. I'm just going to keep it on hard tube for now. And then you have this high frequency cutoff and low frequency cutoff. So how much of the frequencies do you want to be dealing with? Most of the time with vocals, you can ride up on the low frequency knob. I don't want to be distorting low end information as much as I'm distorting the high end, because the high end is where you get that sizzly character. So enough of speaking about it. Let me just hit play, and I'm going to dial in some settings with this red light plugin.
How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won where I come from. How could I, as rich as I, ever want more? Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods.
All right, we're going to add that red light distortion plugin to the drums as well. Just so you know, back on the lead vocal settings, I ended up with a mix knob at 6.5%, drive knob at 3.6. I switched it to a transistor. We have the high frequency as high as it can go at 16K, and then we're rolling off everything below 215 Hertz, which helps clear up the mix quite a bit. All right, so back on the overhead. This is fun putting on drums. Let me just go ahead and solo the overhead and the kick sample so you can hear this in effect. right, that's pretty fun. Let's do it in context of the rest of the mix. Again, here's the settings for the overhead mics.
Where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won. Where I come from, where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won. Where I come from, where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won. Where I come from, where I come from, where I come from, just a dirt road near the backwoods with a deer stand and a front porch. Just a boat ride when the water's right and a fish caught on my hook. That sunrise when it hits her eyes and she gives me that old look. I know that I've already won. Where I come from.
All right, so we made some adjustments there. We got the overhead with a little bit of red light distortion. And then I was just going through with the mix, making some last minute tweaks here. Of course, you can go crazy with any of this stuff. You can keep adding EQ if you like. As you can see on the mix bus, we've got a compressor where we dialed in a little bit more compression. I wanted to hear 2.4 to 1 ratio, minus 19. Seeing, again, at most maybe 3 decibels of compression. And then on the EQ, I just wanted to roll out a little bit of this 279 hertz. Is kind of the low, mid, rumbly stuff, but you can go crazy from there. That is it as far as adding plugins and things like that. Mostly every plugin you use in PreSonus Studio One is going to work in a similar way. They're going to have some sort of mix knob. You're going to have some sort of gain compensation knob. And then you're going to see, as you saw with distortion, as you saw with the delay, you see a lot of the same terms being used over and over again, where you have EQs like high frequency roll-offs, low frequency cuts. It's all kind of becomes familiar the more you play around with it. But those are the 4 main ones I'd want you to check out, especially early on. The Pro EQ, your compressor plugin from PreSonus Studio One, room reverb, and analog delay. You can get a whole lot done with that. Again, check out the Waves Tune real time if you're looking for some sort of auto tune. A lot of these companies also make a trial version, so you can use like a 7-day free trial, I believe. If you want to get more creative, you can use Red Light Distortion, different plugins from PreSonus Studio One. They also have like guitar amp pedal simulation plugins that you can use as well if you're interested in that. Make sure you have all your buses aligned how you'd like them. Now in the next video, we're going to be moving on to the mastering stage. So I'll see you there at that lesson in the next video. Now there are many other videos here on my channel other than the Recording Academy, but make sure you check the playlist for Recording Academy for more lessons as they're being uploaded. YouTube is recommending this video just over my shoulder, so give that one a watch and I'll see you at the next video.